Naomi. Thank you everyone for sharing your wonderful presentations. I think you've given us so much to think about in terms of different data and scales that we can use to impact our programs and new innovative program models, the importance of creating connections with young people and including mentorship in their programming. So yeah, I'm just going to jump to the Q&A now. We have a few questions in the chat around mentorship. So I think that can apply to all of the presentations today. But maybe we can start with Nan's question here. This is a question, I believe, for Alex and Naomi around the gender ratio for the study. So Nan asks, for the gender ratio, is it from a random sample or from the initial selection of the survey respondents? So maybe you could just clarify that for us.
Yeah, thanks, Nan, for that question. So the ratio that we talked about half of the youth participants identifying as male and half identifying as female, that was from the total number of participants who consented to being in the study, which is 24. And from the 24 participants, approximately half did get randomized into an intervention group with rent subsidies and mentorship, and half were randomized into our control group, which is just rent subsidies. So I hope that clarifies things.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And just in terms of mentorship, we have quite a few questions around mentorship here in the chat. Maybe we can start with Alex and Naomi, if you want to talk a little bit about how you chose the mentors and maybe how you defined mentorship differentiated from other kinds of supports. And there's also a question, I believe, from Art here around if the research in general kind of, I know you were saying it was a little bit hard to tell the effect of mentorship throughout the study, but yeah, maybe you can speak to a little to general research as well and what general research says about mentorship and youth homelessness.
Sure, thanks, Arpa. Thanks for your questions. So first of all, in terms of the mentors, so this is a community-based project, so we really wanted our community partners to lead the way, so they recruited the mentors for us. In terms of just an idea of, the mentors ranged all over the place, from school teachers to people in law to people staying at home with their kids, so sort of kind of all over the map. But again, it was really important for us that our community partners recruited and screened the mentors. And then the second question, really interesting question, Art. When we did the literature review leading up to this study, what the evidence shows is that the jury's a little bit out on formal mentorship programs. When they look at, they pull a bunch of studies together and do a meta-analysis, it's kind of like, I think because there's so much nuance associated with formal mentors, like whether you're going to, connect with somebody or not. But what is interesting is in the literature, we saw that there's this emerging evidence on the importance of informal mentors. And that is actually what we ended up finding in our study as well. So that's something that I'm really interested in exploring a little bit further. So I hope that answers your question.
That's awesome. Alex, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that was great. I think, yeah, it's important to remember that we connected with community partners, Covenant House Toronto, the Raft, and Living Rock in Hamilton, like Naomi mentioned, and they really helped us like screen and find really, really amazing mentors. Really,
really cool to hear that it was the mentorship selection process was community driven. Very cool. And for Heather and Marcia, maybe you can speak a little bit about the role of mentorship in the Stepstones program as well, particularly maybe the difference between mentors and the other sort of social connections that you're providing youth as well. I know you were mentioning there were 9 different types of social connections in the program, but yeah, maybe speak about the role that mentorship plays in Stepstones too.
Sure. Okay. So Stepstones has had a mentorship program for youth from the foster care system for the last 10 years. And so we're really familiar in that space. But our pilot project really focuses on finding, kind of like what Naomi just said, existing informal mentors in a young person's life who can operate in that capacity, right? In terms, and then also support them in supporting the youth in moving forward. So the difference for us really is we've looked at volunteer mentors from the community. We've also looked at informal volunteers. We so the model, our mentorship model, is slightly different in the sense that the youth also have a worker. So a youth has a worker as well as a mentor. That worker provides support for the mentor as well as for the youth, and that way we find that the relationship can evolve and continue in a strengthened way. So when things do come up for a young person, the mentor's not sort of all on their own dealing with it. But in terms of the other program that we've just piloted, we look for those people in their life, and the idea there is if they don't have those people, so after we look at all the 100 connections, if the young person still does not have somebody who's able to step into that role, then we would go to the volunteer, more formalized route. But we've been finding is that if we search long enough and hard enough, and we support the young person in finding those people in their life, that we actually do find people that can operate in that capacity. I don't know if Marsha wants to add anything there, but.
Just that I think the matching process with Stepstones is really great for mentorship, because it really does. I've gone through the training process, and I really appreciate how we learn so much about the unique needs of this population. So I would say that the mentors are really tailored to working with this subset of youth, which is great.
That's great. Thank you, Marsha and Heather. And thank you for sharing a little bit about the mentorship program as well, and support for both the mentor and the young people. I think that's one of the first times I've heard about there being support for the mentor as well. And it makes so much sense. So thank you for sharing that. And maybe for the folks at Stepstones and Charlene as well, there's a question here from Scott. He says, I'm in housing first and I have dealt with youth. I find there can be barriers with social development resulting in quick temper and addictions, which leads to negative exits from housing. Is this something that you're dealing with, and how do you handle it? So maybe you can speak from sort of, your program perspective, being practitioners.
Okay, I'll go first. So every youth that comes to us has different needs. Every youth is very, very unique. And so we try to assess what those needs are in the beginning to see if there's anything extra that they might need throughout the process. So when we are trying to find landlords, if there is a special need that the youth has, we try to be upfront about those things, because if we run across landlords that aren't okay with the special needs that the youth have, then those aren't the kind of landlords that we want to have. Point blank, if they're not okay with it. Those aren't the people that we want to work with. But we try to make sure that we have enough support so that we can support those youth who have those needs.
Thanks for that, Charlene. And Heather and Marsha, do you want to speak about this question at all?
I completely agree that the right landlord is important. Also for us, it is about that support so in our pilot project where, existing relationships or people from the community will support a young person, having them move into their home. That is only going to work if that person has support. Right. So that person is given support by our workers to say, when there is a problem, when there is a conflict, they have to be able to work it through with the young person. So there's support for the young person. As part of the program, there's sort of 4 components of support. So there's support for the new caregiver in training, peer-to-peer support. There's therapy that's provided to both the new caregiver as well as the young person. There's a service navigator. So if the young person is struggling with something, or even if the new caregiver is struggling with something, they can navigate services in the community. And then there's another worker who supports the whole connection and navigates and mediates and deals with all that piece that comes up, because it's inevitable. And if the support's not put into place to be there for it when it happens, or to prevent it from happening, then absolutely the housing is not going to be sustainable. So.
Thank you for that, Heather. And it sounds like with creating roots as well, Charlene, some of that education piece, I think, pulls some of those pieces out for the young people as well, learning how to be, a good tenant and what supports are needed. And then you figure out what supports are needed for that young person to keep their housing sustained. So those are fantastic pieces of advice. Thank you to both of you. We only have a few minutes left. And so I'm sorry if I don't get to all of the questions, but I think there are 2 more here that a few folks would really like to get into. Hart has a question here about identity capital. So they say, I was wondering if Naomi could tell us a little bit more about the notion of identity capital and what an intervention addressing this might look like, which is awesome because Naomi, I think you're looking for someone to partner with on this too, potentially.
Yeah, so this is something, so back about 5 years ago when I was doing my doctoral work, for that I hung out with 9 young people that were leaving the shelter system, and I hung out with them for almost a year just to see what it was like for them. And I didn't know anything about identity capital, and that's not what I wanted to I set out to learn about, but I ended up learning about identity capital. So the idea is that you want to draw on your sense of purpose and control, self-efficacy, like I got this, and self-esteem when life gets hard. This is something that we all have, like we all need enough of this, right? And also, what ends up happening is that if you go up against something that's really hard and you don't have that really strong identity capital, you're more likely to take the path of least resistance. And so sometimes that can lead to almost like a learned helplessness over time. And unfortunately, for some young people, it can lead to the cycle of going back into homelessness again. So, and this is to be very clear, I'm not saying young people should bootstrap themselves out of homelessness at all, but identity capital is something that is fostered in us from the minute that we're born. And we don't talk about this enough, I don't think, in young people that are trying to exit homelessness, that this hasn't been fostered in them the way that it should be, then that it could be. And so I'm just learning a lot about just the importance of a sense of purpose. And so what we did for the study that we published is we brought in an executive coach on purpose. So we wanted somebody that had nothing to do with homelessness and not in like a stigmatizing location. It was a really cool loft space. And she did this 6-week, 6-session program with young people. We had 19 of them. And even 9 months later, we met with them every 3 months. There was statistically significant differences in a sense of hope and self-esteem 9 months after this simple program. It was really cool to see. And so I would like to try that again, because what we saw in our study is that mentorship kind of didn't really stick to young people that didn't have a good sense of where they wanted to go. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like if you're trying to give somebody directions and they're like, well, I'm not really sure where I want to go, that's a little bit more challenging. So yeah, I hope that answers your question about identity capital, but it's a concept that I'm learning a lot about. And I think we can talk about it a little bit more in our space.
Thank you, Naomi. And I know you mentioned there was an intervention that was implemented a few years ago. And maybe in the chat, you can share what the name of that intervention was in case folks want to look it up afterwards too.
Sure. I actually, in the slides, and people can access the slides, I hyperlinked the study there.
Amazing.
You just click on it and go to it. It's called the Identity Project.
Very cool. Thank you. And there's a question from Daryl here for Charlene. How successful have you been in motivating youth to attend Rent Smart training? Were there any strategies that you used to achieve attendance?
Well, there's a strategy that there's a certificate that you get at the end that you can show landlords that you've actually taken like 11 hours of training to be the most prepared tenant. So there's that. But also there's some other angles that I'm looking into, and actually I've gotten some ideas from Stepstones, and I'm actually approaching my old high school. I'm approaching my old high school that runs some courses for adults as well as for youth, that potentially they could get a high school credit by doing this training. So I'm going to really push for that and gun for that. And I think that would be a really great motivator for youth. And I want to thank Heather for that idea.
That's awesome. So much learning even amongst our presenters. That's so great to hear. Awesome. We are a minute over time. So for those of you watching, I just encourage you to look at the slides again, look further into the work that the folks here presenting are doing. And for our presenters, there are a few questions left in the chat. If you have a few minutes to reply to them, that would be fantastic. But yeah, thank you all so much for sharing so much information with us and giving us a lot of food for thought and a lot of maybe actions that we want to take with our programs next. We really appreciate it and hope everyone enjoys the rest of their conference. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.